status in Kenya of the Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which requires that the promotion of the full realization of all human rights of PWDs, which Kenya ratified in 2008. The quorum bell is currently on at the Senate as the House awaits to at least get 15 senators in the chamber this morning to allow the House commence business this morning. This followed the directive by the Speaker, Honorable Amason Kingi, seeking to have the sergeant-at-arms ring the quorum bell to give senators some leeway to make their way into the chamber this morning. Also lined up for debate this morning is the review of the minimum wage necessitated by the high cost of living, a motion by nominated Senator Karen Nyamu. The Senate has raised the requisite quorum this morning. Allow me to hand over for the live broadcast of the Senate proceedings. My name is Gladys Mungai. Enjoy your viewing.
Mr. Speaker, equal to us as members. This is not something that we want to allow moving forward. The Minister for Health, Susan, has also not equally been appearing to the Health Committee in the Senate. Then who is she in this country if she cannot appear before Parliament? We need answers, because the next question, the first question that when she'll appear will be, why don't you appear before Parliament? We need to know if in that job description that she signed stated that it will be in her choice either to appear or not to appear. We need to understand the job description of these ministers. Is it in their clause? Then hence they behave the way they want to behave. We have matters we needed to ask. We have business we needed to conduct. We are here because of the representation that we do for this country. And if they are not going to be able to execute their mandate, they need to tell Kenyans, we are not in a position, because appearing in Parliament is one of their responsibilities. If that cannot be achieved, that we need answers to be able to give other Kenyans the opportunities to serve people in this country. You know the matters of health, how sensitive they are in this country. And the whole minister decides. It is wrong, Mr. Speaker. We cannot move forward like this. This is a day, a Wednesday day, we set for the Senate to abandon our committee sessions, to be able to sit with the ministers. We have a manifesto as Kenya Kwanza to be able to achieve the plans that we set during our campaign period. We can only achieve when us, the representatives, sit with the executive, be able to question on the matters that need to be addressed. And then today somebody decides that they're not going to do that. Total disrespect. Total disrespect. Moving forward, Mr. Speaker, we need better than this. It is what it is, and we need better results. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Margaret Kamar.
Mr. Speaker, mine will be brief because I and you served in the position of cabinet before, and the respect we had for the House was above everything else. It's a pity that CSS are not appearing as they have promised, because it's one thing to give an apology, and it's another one to give an apology when the House is already sitting, because we are wasting our whole morning because of them. I think it's very important that they get the message today that we are not going to. But, Mr. Speaker, there is still also the appearance of ministers in committees, and we have had this problem in the Committee of Education. We even have had a problem which has come to this House, which was forwarded to the committee, to our committee, on payment of teachers of monies that were accrued between 1997 and the year 2000, I think, and 2. And the CS of Treasury was supposed to come. 3 times he has missed. We have fined him 500,000. He has not come. He has sent a message that he should be forgiven for the 500,000, but he has not arrived again. I think, Mr. Speaker, even as we conclude this discussion, you need to invoke that non-appearance fine, because it is good that we hold them also responsible on their own so that they feel the pinch, because Kenya is losing. Kenya is losing because if we don't address the issues that members have, issues that have come from, petitions that have come before us, it is really a waste of time. I remember yesterday, as we were going through, taking stock in our committee, we discovered that we have performed only 50%. We have only addressed 50% of the questions, and all the others, 50% of them, 10 questions have not been responded to, let alone appearance. They have said respond, so that if we find a need to invite you, we invite you. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to agree with my leader of majority and all those who have contributed that it is very important that we make the statement clearly, but my suggestion is that we invoke the standing order that has a fine, so that we fine them and they actually start to take responsibility. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Cheptumo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to add my voice also to this very serious matter. Mr. Speaker, if you read Article 1 of our Constitution on the sovereignty of the people, Sub-Article 2 says, the people may exercise their sovereign power either directly or through their elected representatives, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when a CS displays contempt to this House, that CS, Mr. Speaker, is actually directly challenging the sovereign power of the Kenyan people. And Mr. Speaker, it is the President himself who formally wrote to this House, Mr. Speaker, under your leadership, and requested us to amend our standing orders so that the ministers should appear before the House and answer questions. The intention of the President then, Mr. Speaker, and I think even up to now, is so that he is able to be accountable to the Kenyan people. That was the intention. Then, Mr. Speaker, the question that arises, therefore, is, if the head of state has been able to request the House to amend the standing orders, went ahead to do so, and the same CSS in the executive fails to appear before this House, Mr. Speaker, what then does that mean? Mr. Speaker, I agree with the leaders who have spoken earlier than me, that this is the moment this House should be able to take its position, Mr. Speaker, and be able to put strict measures to this failing ministers. Mr. Speaker, if you look at question number 18 in the standing order, in the order paper today, which was supposed to be answered by the Minister for Foreign Affairs, it is about Kenyans who are arrested in Uganda and charged in a court of law in Moroto district in Uganda for crossing over in search of pasture. Mr. Speaker, these are Kenyans who are already in custody in a foreign land. The CS was supposed to come and address Kenyans here, what steps he's taking. And it's not coming, Mr. Speaker. You can see the extent of the pain that is causing Kenyans by them failing, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I want to really agree with this, the leadership, that is the majority leader, that, Mr. Speaker, this should not be taken lightly. And, Mr. Speaker, you've been able to guide. In this particular House, Mr. Speaker, if a member is out of order, you always expel members out of this order, Mr. Speaker, out of this sitting. What is the redress, Mr. Speaker, for the Kenyan people who are suffering, who needs to be addressed on matters health, matters security, matters water, and the ministers in charge failed to appear? I think, Mr. Speaker, the sanction that should be put in place should be such serious. And, Mr. Speaker, I think this House has the power to discipline these ministers in a manner. And I want to agree with Kamar that perhaps, Mr. Speaker, for the first time, you may impose the payment of fine of $500,000 to these two ministers who have failed to appear before this House. So, Mr. Speaker, I support, and I think going forward, Mr. Speaker, again, as I conclude, it is even more worrying that not only are they failing to appear here, they even fail to appear before the committees. So, Mr. Speaker, in the chamber, they don't appear. In the committees, they don't appear. So, how will this House function, Mr. Speaker, in serving Kenyans? It is painful, and, Mr. Speaker, I think you have the powers to impose certain serious penalties to these ministers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Dulo.
Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to give an info. First, let me say that there was a reason why the President and members of Parliament felt that ministers should come and appear before this House to answer certain questions that are actually affecting Kenyans. And I think for them to fail to appear before this House is disrespectful to this particular House and to the people of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, we have provision and powers and privilege where ministers are actually supposed to be summoned, failure to which they can also be charged a certain fee. And I think for us, we should start actually doing that so that these ministers can respect this country. Some of us, we woke up very early to come and actually listen to them so that we can represent our people. And for them just to say that we have gone for trips, that is not important compared to the challenges Kenyans are facing. Mr. Speaker, we need to take serious action against those ministers who actually give an excuse every now and then. I thank you.
Senator Mariam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, giving me this opportunity as I add my voice. Mr. Speaker, as ministers, as finance, as Vice Chair of Committee Health, we have not, we call Minister of Health 4 times. She has not appeared. I think, Mr. Speaker, CS must differentiate between this is not a private office. This is a public office, and they have to differentiate what is their role. And first priority is the role of Kenyans, what to do for Kenyans. As a health sector, we have to strengthen devolution and health sector. Mr. Speaker, and again, Minister of Trade, we also called him and he has not appeared. So that shows they are not even serious on their work. Mr. Speaker, again, what I realize as a new person in this Senate, ministers, they don't take serious Senate issues because we are not the budget makers for them. So let them clearly that if first priority is National Assembly or Senate, because they have to treat them well together, the same as National Assembly and Senate are the same government armies, and they are supposed to treat them the same. And Mr. Speaker, when it comes to summon, we summon them, but they have not responded. So that means that is disrespect. And when they are given these positions, they have took the oath that they will be ready to work with Kenyan and the MPs. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, this shows that there's a disrespect, and we have to summon them and give them fees. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Seki.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I also want to contribute to this contribution by the Majority Leader on this issue of cabinet ministers not appearing before Senate and even the committees. In our Committee of Trade, we have, Honorable Speaker, tried to invite the Minister for Trade, but he has never appeared to our committee. Equally, I'm also a member in the Committee of Education, and the Minister for Finance, Treasury, National Treasury, has always been absent on issues that involve citizens of this Republic of Kenya, teachers of this Republic of Kenya who are retired, and they have never received any pension for quite a number of years. And these are very pertinent issues, Honorable Speaker. We really need to have very punitive penalties to these cabinet ministers who are not appearing before this House and even committees, because I don't think we were wrong to change the standing orders, and the President himself instructed and gave an instruction that cabinet ministers must appear before this House. So I think we don't want to continue labor in, and even talking to them. We just need now to penalize them and let them feel the consequences. Otherwise, we are dissatisfied on what they are doing and the kind of notices they give us the last minute. We have processes. This House is a house of order, and a house that has its own process and plans. So I don't think they should come here to disrupt the entire process of the Senate. So I think we want to support you, Honorable Speaker, to give penalties to this, to penalize these cabinet secretaries who are not coming. And if then it is supposed for us to call the prime cabinet minister here, prime cabinet secretary here, to answer as to why his cabinet secretaries are not coming to appear before this House. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Senator Veronica.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Let me first say this morning that the Senate is very disappointed and expresses displeasure at the spite and the contempt that has been shown by the CSs who have not appeared here. But let me also be quick to point that there are a number of CSs who have shown respect and have met their constitutional obligation by appearing before this House. And one of the CSs we must distinguish is the CS for Interior, the Minister for Interior, who has been very respectful to this House and has appeared, I believe, twice before this House and presented responses to questions that were raised by senators on behalf of the people of Kenya, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, it appears as though the CSs are not taking this as an important function or a very vital function of accountability to the people of Kenya. And the reason why some of the questions are being raised by Kenyans is because maybe the ministries have not been fully effective in serving the people of Kenya. And for that, they must remain accountable and continue to improve the services that are being rendered from the ministries. And if those services are being rendered at an optimal level of 100%, nobody would call them here to ask questions that are being asked by senators on behalf of the people. I would also want to point out, Mr. Speaker, that for repeat offenders who do not appear, who are summoned to answer questions and they do not appear, Mr. Speaker, then we should consider also a motion to censure such a CS who does not want to come and explain the functions of the ministry or respond to issues that have not been adequately tackled to the extent that citizens are asking questions on their areas of operation, Mr. Speaker. By and large, Mr. Speaker, we would wish to remind the CSs, and unfortunately it's being done by senators, even from the side of the Kenya Kwanza, we would wish to remind them that this House, Mr. Speaker, amended the standing orders to accommodate an opportunity and to give a platform to the CSs to be able to have a conversation with Kenya through their representatives. And for that, Mr. Speaker, they must abide by the standing orders, they must abide by the summons when they are summoned to the House or summoned to the committees. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, the penal sanction should come into play. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Hillary Sige.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It took time before I could appreciate that the opportunity was to myself by the reference to my first name. I would like to also express my displeasure, Honorable Speaker, on the conduct of the cabinet secretaries. And I was going through the standing orders which were amended for a reason. Mr. Speaker, Standing Order 51D of the standing orders of this House provides that the Senate may, where a cabinet secretary fails without reasonable cause to appear and responds to questions under this part, move a motion to censure the cabinet secretary. Mr. Speaker, as at the time of this amendment, I believe this was done in order to ensure that the reason as to why cabinet secretaries are asked to appear before the House is to speak to Kenyans through their representatives on questions which are very key and which requires their personal attention and attendance before the House. One of the questions that was meant to be asked today, earlier on, Senator Jeptumo, question number 18, with regards to Kenyans who are currently arrested and in a foreign country, was one of the questions whenever he has traveled to. It is something that would have taken priority over any other engagement by the cabinet secretary. And it is a show, Mr. Speaker, of disrespect to the House. It is a show of desire to make sure that the cabinet secretary takes responsibility for the core mandate, because this House is a representative of all the Kenyans. The cabinet secretary sits in the office to make sure that the role that this House performs is within the demands that is required. And therefore, their failure to appear, and worst, giving the excuse that they did in the last minute, is a complete disrespect of the House. Mr. Speaker, I join my colleagues in expressing the displeasure in calling the Honorable Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs and Cabinet Secretary for Health for failing to honor the House, for failing to even give the House sufficient notice in terms of the inability to appear. And Mr. Speaker, in order to make sure that we do not waste the time of this Honorable House in future, we need to ensure that we call them out and we censor them where possible. And in particular, remember this House has passed the bill on powers and privileges, where such individuals can be surcharged at a personal level, where they meet the cost that the law provides for their failure to perform their role using their own resources and not public resources. The moment we do that and we implement that, Mr. Speaker, they will appreciate the need to comply. Secondly, and lastly, Mr. Speaker, the Office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary that coordinates the offices of Cabinet Secretaries must also be summoned so that he also takes responsibility for his ministers who fail to attend to summons of this House and summons of the committee. Hearing that certain cabinet secretaries take their pleasure and time to attend even to summons by committees is completely out of order, and we call upon them to immediately correct where they have failed to do so, whether intentional or otherwise. But more importantly, this House needs to stamp its authority, surcharge them where possible, and also apply the provisions of Standing Order 51D and censor them so that Kenyans can also appreciate that once a public or state officer is given responsibility, there are consequences of their non-compliance with the summons or with the responsibilities that their offices demands of them. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Eddy. You may contribute while seated, Senator Eddy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And actually, good morning. I have not been in the House for quite a while, and thank you for your support during this time. I know I'm still on sick leave, but sometimes it is sickly to be in the House and not to be in the House at home and not being here, because sometimes the deliberations here are more important and more healing than being at home. And I want to thank you so much for allowing me the flexibility to sometimes show up. Mr. Speaker, I think that this is a pertinent issue. And I think that from the minority side, it's very hard sometimes for me to chime in because, as you're aware, the minority side is still in court on this particular issue of cabinet secretaries appearing before the House. And I think that I wanted to just contribute in the spirit of being the Senate, and perhaps my ideological or perhaps our collective ideological leading that this House actually should be the upper house. And in some areas, we can be able to deliberate and have a conversation whether we can rethink some of the decisions that you have made, Mr. Speaker, because this is one of the instances that perhaps the minority side had predicted, and perhaps we might even have worse instances where cabinet secretaries might want to disparage the standing orders of this House for the same purpose that perhaps constitutionally they are not obligated to obey the standing orders of this House. I know there is a desire, and I believe that I speak to the minority side when I say that there is a desire, and rightfully so, to have cabinet secretary appear before the Houses of Parliament. Because if you read the Constitution does delineate the responsibility and accountability framework for senators, for cabinet secretaries. But that delineation is limited to the extent that they have to appear in committees. So this is a challenge that as a country we are dealing with, but I wanted to encourage the Senate to have a higher conversation of how do we make this accountability framework even stronger. To some extent, we might be faced with things like proposing a constitutional amendment, because, Mr. Speaker, the decisions, responsibilities, and accountability for cabinet secretaries is very well articulated under Article 153, which you have talked about many times, but I want just to go back to it for the purposes of this conversation. If you read 153.1, it says that all their decisions must always be in writing. And then, if you come to 2, it says that cabinet secretaries are accountable individually and collectively to the president for the exercise of their powers and performance on their functions. So then it requires perhaps that in the event that the standing orders of this House have been adjusted for them to appear, and then they don't appear, then, Mr. Speaker, does it mean that through your chair, the Senate writes to the President to launch a complaint? And if this House writes to the President to launch a complaint, what then becomes the accountability framework for the executive vis-a-vis the Parliament? Because the moment we start exchanging with the executive, and particularly the President, on the issue of cabinet secretaries not getting to this House, then already we are interfering with the Constitution. Then secondly, the Constitution says that a cabinet secretary shall attend. Remember, the issue of accountability is provided for in terms of, one, providing documents in writing, and two, where they're supposed to attend. And the Constitution says that in terms of attendance, the cabinet secretaries shall attend before a committee of the National Assembly or the Senate when required by the committee, and answer any question concerning a matter for which the cabinet secretary is responsible. With regards to provision of documents, if you read the same article, sub-article 4, that is where they can be able to provide us with documents in writing. So there's a lacuna here that we have created with the standing orders, Mr. Speaker, that I think that is dangerous for us and exposes us, because even if you were to impose something like a fine that some of my colleagues are proposing, on what basis does a cabinet secretary honor that kind of fine? Because if they go if you go to court, I can assure you the court will stick to the interpretation of what is the accountability lab and framework for cabinet secretaries as required in the Constitution. So I do appreciate, Mr. Speaker, that this is a dilemma that we are dealing with as a House, and you must be respected, we must be respected, but I think that whether informally or formally, I wanted to plead with you, Mr. Speaker, that this is something that we need to have a higher conversation than just the National Assembly, because we are the House that helps some sense of stability in terms of representation, given that as a Senate, we hold that majoritarian kind of representation, given that all the constituencies in our counties end up giving us that power to be able to help this House, this nation think at a higher level. I do appreciate that the majority side has decided that we adjust on our, standing orders to allow the cabinet secretaries in, but Mr. Speaker, we are going to face a lot of these dilemmas going forward. This is just an introduction to the dilemma we have with the cabinet secretaries, because some of them individually, as the Constitution has said, will be sure that they are protected by the Constitution, not to be punished by this House for not appearing or in this House, but in committees. So I wanted to urge, if it suits this House, that let's allow ourselves, that these are bipartisan conversation, that we have at a higher level on how do we ensure that we can keep the cabinet more accountable to us, but within the framework of the Constitution, that even if it is a hard choice that we have to make as a country to amend the Constitution, then let us do it. Because otherwise, they're not members of this House, and they're not obligated to be in this House, and they know, and you cannot punish them or keep them accountable to that, unless you directly induce the same with the presidency, which again brings conflict of accountability and responsibility between the cabinet, between the presidency and Parliament in general, but more specifically with regards to Senate. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Matinga.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I also want to add my voice into this issue that has not only been affecting the business of the committee. Indeed, a lot has been said about the legal implication and legal requirements. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, I would want to say, we, especially on the majority side, we have one obligation of representing and prosecuting government business. But if the CSs, who are the instrument through which the executive formulates and implements the policy, if they are not prepared to come and answer basic questions that would help us prosecute the same two of the people we represent, how then do we even work? I think, considering that, yes, there are a lot of legal implications, as Senator Eddie has said, I would want to disagree that it is actually a question of goodwill. Much of the work that we have to do in politics, it's about the goodwill that is and should be there between the members when it calls upon the minority and the majority to sit and close ranks and discuss issues that will ensure that we advance and promote devolution. Mr. Speaker, sir, at times it's very discouraging, more so when we are in recess and we are scheduled to meet as CS in a committee. You travel all the way from up country only to be told that morning the CS is not appearing. That has happened severally, and there are some who are totally notorious. In the large committee, which I'm a member of, we have several issues, several statements. I do remember there is a statement by one senator here, Senator Wambua, that was given last year, November. It was about drought mitigation. Up to now, Mr. Speaker, we've not been able to address it. At times, it's quite shameful when you're addressing an issue that has been overtaken by events, and you do not even know what to tell people. We have statements we are supposed to look at, but without the input of the ministers, we are lost. I therefore think, Mr. Speaker, it is important as a House, and specifically because you have the power to engage, maybe even with the presidency, because the excuse that I've traveled with the president, I'm traveling with the deputy president, most of the time, Mr. Speaker, it's the excuse we are given. And at times, they are only traveling within the country. And I ask myself, the business that they are going to prosecute, where they are going for those meetings, those are the same matters that we want to discuss in the committee. It is therefore hampers the business of the committees when we are not able to answer questions, we are not able to prosecute the statements, we are not even able to explain to the petitioners or to the people who place the statements what is the official position. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, my request to the chair would be use your position so that it does not become very frustrating and very demotivating for us, especially in the committees that we share, that we are at times even seen by some members of our committee like we are shielding the executive. We are not, Mr. Speaker. We would try to give excuses, we would try to give explanations, but you cannot do it 5, 6, 7 times. It is, Mr. Speaker, sir, time that you clapped the whip, use the position you have, and even have a candid discussion with the executive. Because that point is going to come when we are going to say, fine, if it is the executive, the presidency that is making them not appear, then we may as well sit back and let them prosecute the business, which you know will not be very good. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I think it is important that you start a candid discussion as we do the things officially, as we do the lighting. We also tell the president that this excuse that I'm traveling with the deputy or with the president outside, maybe in another county, it should come to an end. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Muma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to contribute to this conversation. Mr. Speaker, I think what is happening is affirming the need for the Senate to fight for its independence so that the Senate is able to move as Senate, not because there is a trigger from the executive. Mr. Speaker, the Wednesday morning sessions were celebrated as a session that was going to bring a cure to the perennial non-appearance of CSS in the Senate. You can see, Mr. Speaker, that it doesn't seem to be any different. The CSS don't want to come to the committees, and they have started snapping this session. Mr. Speaker, it points to the fact that what we needed to do is to actually look at what our functions are independently and insist on implementing those our powers without necessarily saying we are setting a session because it is the desire of the president. Mr. Speaker, I wish to wear the shoe of CS Nahumicha for a second. So this session was on the trigger of the president that we should have ministers should come here every Wednesday. But it is the same president who we are being told has gone with Mrs. Nahumicha to a foreign trip. So we are talking about a house that acted in order to meet the president's need, and also a CS who is trying to meet the president's need. I think it shows that we need, as a Senate and a Parliament, to focus on our mandate and to implement it without feeling we are implementing it as a favor to the executive. Mr. Speaker, if we don't get back to that, we are losing this House. So I would request that in all matters, that the Senate does not defer to the executive. Otherwise, they feel we are a footnote in all their business, and therefore, our business can wait, and they can, on short notice, tell us that we can hold on because they have more important business to do as the executive. Mr. Speaker, it has been suggested that the CS be surcharged. And I agreed that the CS should be surcharged. Mr. Speaker, what we need to do is that I hope the taxpayer will not be paying the surcharge, because it is the taxpayer that is being shortchanged here. If any CS is surcharged on this matter, I wish to request that Senate ensures that the rule requires that the minister or the CS in charge pays from their own personal resources, so that the taxpayer is not surcharged for the failure of a public officer in taking on their responsibility. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I request that this matter is not just swept under the carpet. The two CSS should possibly be summoned before this House to discuss this very matter before they even come for the discussion of their questions. They need to be summoned before this Senate for a discussion with them on their behavior in regard to this matter. I support, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Wafula. Senator Wafula.
Thank you, Mheshimiwa Speaker. Asante sana. kwa nafasi hii. Lile tunalozungumzia sasa linapata mawaziri katikati ya jiwe na mahali pagumu, pale ambapo aliyowateua na anayeamini kwa uchapakazi wao na uadilifu wao ameona kwa hekima yake kuwapa nafasi kusafiri naye katika nchi za ng'ambo, kutetea nafasi na hadhi ya nchi ya Kenya na mustakabali wa wizara zao na nchi wanakokwenda. Na hapa sisi kama wawakilishi watumwa wa wapigaji kura vile vile tunadai uwepo wao na majibu yao. Ni kama shingo kuuliza kichwa, mbona hautumiki kumeza chakula unachotafuna? Mheshimiwa Spika, naomba kwamba jumba la Senate na wachapakazi wake wawe na udiplomasia wa mapema, kujadili ratiba na mipangilio kwa mapema, na vile vile mawaziri na wasaidizi wao wawe na mawasiliano ya karibu na jumba la Senate ili mipangilio yao isilete aibu mbele ya Wakenya. Kwa mfano, sisi ni serikali, wale tunaoshutumu ni wachapakazi wa serikali. Iwaje mkono mmoja unaukata mwingine kwa madai kwamba mkono huu haujathibiti majukumu tuliyotupa? Sasa mimi kama mmoja wao maseneta wa serikali, tutawarai viongozi wenzangu katika serikali tuwe na kikao na tusemezane haya maneno, kwa sababu haiwezi kuwa tunakuja hapa kulia na baadaye tena tutakaa na mawaziri kupanga ajenda ya nchi. Asante sana Mheshimiwa Spika.
Senator AC Okenyure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. I also want to speak expressing my displeasure for what has just happened. I don't know if cabinet secretaries are just too afraid of defending their performance records in this House, or it's a matter of total disregard for democracy. Because I think this is the right avenue for a cabinet secretary to defend and show the public and articulate government policy, as members of the Senate also do the same through the legislative means, Mr. Speaker. But the continuous behavior we are seeing actually calls us as leaders to think about how we want to serve the Kenyans in this country. Mr. Speaker, even if you're going to penalize these cabinet secretaries, if within an individual has no drive to give service to Kenyans from both the executive and the legislative arm, it's not going to be having much impact. We need to have a serious conversation and not just government side. We are now leaders representing Kenyans from different walks of life who are expecting the executive to deliver on that end, and members of the Senate whom they voted for to deliver from their end. So this morning, I really want to urge our colleagues on the executive end to seriously think about the direction we want this country to be in. Before I came to this House as a senator, I really used to admire the constructive engagement the previous houses would have. Lately, it's more like a routine. The vigor, the quality debates, we have a problem, all those are going down, and I'm beginning to think, really, is this what we want to show the millions of Kenyans who have bestowed their mandate for us to lead them? Mr. Speaker, it's not about settling scores. And I want to urge the cabinet secretaries appearing here to explain government policy. This is the cheapest opportunity you have, because then we are the ambassadors who are going to take down the message to the various constituencies and wards. But when you turn this down, and I think yes, explanations have been given, last-minute explanations. And on my end, I would want to imagine, yes, if the president requests a specific cabinet secretary to accompany him, there might be matters that are relevant to the Kenyans, and he deems fit that the specific cabinet secretary accompanies him. But that should not be an excuse for members failing to attend this question time, because where else do you want citizens to get answers from? In committees, you don't appear. At the Senate, you don't appear. Where do you want your help to come from? And we do not want to go to the streets like our colleagues did. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I also want to join my colleagues on at least the concerns that most of the ministers have invaded this House. Honorable Speaker, as you're aware, this is a presidential system of government, and it was only through the consultation of the executive and the parliament that the standing orders of this House have been changed for the convenience of the public of Kenya and for the convenience of the people of Kenya, so at least they can be able to hear how the executive and the parliament are related, and getting related and working for them. As you're aware, we have just changed it, in the 11th and 12th parliament, the ministers are not coming. And the executive was not there. And I think it is actually the same executive that has felt that the ministers must appear in the houses so that at least Kenyans will be able to be informed on what is going in its own development and whatever is taking place. But however, it's very unfortunate that the ministers are invading the houses, especially the Senate. But one thing they should know that is that this is the very house that's able to impeach even the president. It's not that they're taking it light. The house that is actually have the honors to impeach the president and the governors. So I think ministers should understand. I know why they're going to National Assembly is just because that's where they get some of their money. I mean, when they're making their budgets. So they believe if they don't attend there, then maybe they will not be able to get the relevant, budgets that they want to use. But however, it is very unfortunate that ministers, the CS actually are now invading the houses, and that shall not be so. I think we need to consult both houses, to consult with the executive to show that I know the head of state actually is so much serious about the whole issue, because this is actually a suggestion that came from the executive. And therefore, this must be implemented. And I think the ministers now should be facing heavy penalties for invading the houses to answer the respective questions. That actually the questions we present are not our questions. The questions belongs to the public, and the very public that we represent, all of us. The very public that all of us are serving, including the ministers. Therefore, there is no reason for us, to the ministers to invade coming to this house to answer to the public. With those few remarks, I want to ask my colleagues also, and I join them, that we must at least take action that is appropriate for these ministers to attend when they're summoned. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. Next order, clerk.
Order number 8, motion. Incorporation of intelligent water management systems in building plans for sustainable living.
Senator Wamatinga, you may proceed to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to reply. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me start by thanking my colleagues who contributed a lot in this motion. They did unleash the idea, and they did also suggest a way forward that we as a country can embrace the dangers that are facing Kenyans today in matters climate change. Mr. Speaker, sir, indeed everybody did agree that it is the high time we started treating water as prestigious commodity as it is. It is indeed in some places known that water is more expensive than fuel. We have all along, Mr. Speaker, sir, treated water like a commodity that is not diminishable, but the discussion through this motion, we came to the realization, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we need, as a country, to embrace methods not only to conserve water, but also to make sure that whatever we have, we use it intelligently. Mr. Speaker, sir, indeed, it must be a part of the government policy to ensure moving forward that we do not only conserve water, but we also employ technology as it is today so that we can ensure that water is used in the right way. Moving forward, Mr. Speaker, sir, the country as it is today, having come from a long drought, now endowed with quite good rainfall, we know that in a couple of months we'll be faced with drought again, Mr. Speaker, not because the climate is not favorable, but because as a country we failed to ensure that we put measures in place to harvest, and not only harvest, but also make sure that whatever we harvest, we use it intelligently. Mr. Speaker, sir, if you've traveled across the globe, most of the facilities that we get, they have intelligent water systems whereby the water tap will go on and off as you use it. Mr. Speaker, sir, in a country like ours, where we're still struggling with resources, where we are faced with more than about 80% of the country being semi-arid, we need and we must embrace such technologies so that the little water that we get can be used for a longer duration. As the government has put it, Mr. Speaker, sir, we'll be constructing mega dams, but they will also not be of any use, Mr. Speaker, if we do not embrace modern technologies to ensure that when we are doing irrigation, we move away from furrow irrigation, we move away from the open trench irrigation into the technology-controlled drip irrigation system. And this, Mr. Speaker, sir, can only be realized if we put the policy and legal infrastructure and measures in place so that we can enforce. And this, Mr. Speaker, sir, would mean for all the government buildings that we have, we must incorporate intelligent water systems for all the new buildings that are coming up, Mr. Speaker, sir. Before a license is issued, we must ensure that we also put intelligent water use system in place. Mr. Speaker, sir, we have TVET colleges across the country. The water probing and intelligent water system is not a very complicated technology. Using the TVETs available, Mr. Speaker, sir, it would be an opportunity to introduce pipelines, to introduce the systems through the youth empowerment programs that they can be able to be incorporated in the buildings that will be coming up. Mr. Speaker, sir, if we embrace that as a country, if we embrace that, we will not only be able to save water, but at the same time we'll be able to conserve and the environment, and at the same time, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is important to note that every drop of water that gets into a household must be discharged somewhere. Mr. Speaker, sir, we know that wastewater management in this country has become a major challenge. You only need to walk along the Nairobi River, along the Gong River, and several other rivers, Mr. Speaker, sir, that flows all the way to the ocean. See how intoxicated they are, Mr. Speaker, just because we have failed to manage the way we use our water. We've failed to manage the way we manage our water waste system. Mr. Speaker, sir, today, there are all off-shelf solutions that are available, affordable, and not as expensive that can be implemented to help the country manage the water systems, and at the same time also ensure that we do embrace a lot of recycling so that we do not end up losing this as important resource. Mr. Speaker, sir, if we indeed embrace the intelligent water technology into our day-to-day usage, we would be able to save more than 60% of the water that goes to waste. This, Mr. Speaker, sir, if you look at the half a liter of a bottle when you should buy from a supermarket, Mr. Speaker, sir, if you turn that into the liters that we lose, we are losing a lot of money, Mr. Speaker, that can be saved and that can be used to do other more pressing issues. And therefore, it must be a policy of the government. We as the people must also, as the leadership, must also preach to our people the importance of ensuring that we incorporate these intelligent water systems when we are doing construction. Mr. Speaker, sir, as I wind up, I would want to thank all the members who stood and contributed to this motion, and I would want to urge them not to stop there, but as they go in the ballastas, as they go for the church services, as they go for the meetings with the radio presentation or TV shows, let them remind Kenyans that we have an obligation to ensure that we collectively conserve our environment so that it becomes sustainable for the future generation, because that is something that we are obliged to do to ensure that we meet all the development goals, while at the same time ensuring that they are sustainable so that we do not lose the opportunity for the future generation to use this country, enjoy the fruits of this country as we did. Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to reply.
Now, Honorable Senators, pursuant to Standing Order 84-1, I proceed to make a determination that indeed this matter does not affect counties, and therefore voting shall be by voice. I'll proceed to put the question. That aware that water is an essential yet scarce resource whose demand is increasing rapidly due to population growth, urbanization and industrialization, and whose wastage has become an issue that needs to be addressed urgently owing to the Kenyans' vulnerability to climate change. Noting that there is a growth in the number of buildings coming up to accommodate the rapidly growing population, thereby posing a challenge to water management. Appreciating that the incorporation of water management systems in building plans include a variety of techniques and technologies such as rainwater harvesting, wastewater recycling, low-flow plumbing, and sensor systems that detect leaks and deactivate water flow when necessary, thereby optimizing the use of water by eliminating water overexploitation, wastewater management, and pollution. Now, therefore, the Senate urges the Ministry of Lands, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development, in coordination with the Council of Governors and the National Environment Management Authority, to do the following. Incorporate it into the building code and standards a requirement for intelligent water management systems in all building plans, and 2, undertake a systematic nationwide renovation to government-owned buildings to incorporate water management systems. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many as of the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it.
Next order, clerk. Order number 9, motion accelerating the implementation of sustainable development goals.
The Honorable Senator Catherine Muma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the motion on accelerating the implementation of sustainable development goals. Aware that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015 provides a shared global blueprint aimed at ending poverty, protecting the Earth's environment and climate, and ensuring that people everywhere enjoy peace and prosperity, appreciating that the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Kenya started by the official launch of the Sustainable Development Goals in Kenya in 2016, followed by the development of the County SDGs roadmap to guide the transition from Millennium Development Goals to SDGs, and the mainstreaming of SDGs at both the national and county governments, concerned that the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Kenya has been affected negatively by shocks such as continued drought since 2019 in Kenya and around the world, and serious invasion by desert locusts, the COVID-19 pandemic, and other public health calamities, and the current strained state of the Kenyan economy. Now, therefore, the Senate resolves that the State Department for Economic Planning, in consultation with the Council of Governors, comes up with reviewed implementation roadmaps for the two levels of government, taking into account the shocks that have impeded or any other that are likely to impede the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, Mr. Speaker, the SDGs are one of the many international obligations that Kenya has signed onto. And Mr. Speaker, I move this motion so that as Senate and possibly the House of Parliament, we need to recognize the need to, in our job of carrying out oversight, we need to find a way of holding the executives, both at the national and the county level, accountable to delivering on the obligations that we make internationally as Kenya. Mr. Speaker, the SDGs are a myriad of and aligned to a number of our own development agenda. And Mr. Speaker, this is something that we have recognized. In 2008, we had or developed our own blueprint, which is the Vision 2030, that has guided development planning in this country for all these years. Mr. Speaker, after the adoption of the SDGs in 2016, Kenya signed on to the SDGs and started aligning its medium-term plans alongside the Vision 2030. The Vision 2030 has three broad pillars: the economic pillar, the social pillar, and the political pillar. And Mr. Speaker, the SDGs are 16 in number. They include SDG number 1, no poverty; 2, zero hunger. I'll just name them without any particular order. No poverty, zero hunger, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equity, clean water and sanitation, reduced inequalities, and peace, justice, and strong institutions. Mr. Speaker, all these are issues that we are trying to address as a country through our Vision 2030, through the current national government's own agenda, through the county government's planning. Mr. Speaker, what we don't do well in this country is to be able to have a forum where we are able to hold the executive accountable on how they are moving on the targets they have set on each of these SDGs. Mr. Speaker, this motion is seeking to require that the national government economic planning department and the county governments through the COG come up with a framework that can assist the Senate, can assist the National Assembly to be able to speak confidently, to be able to say, as Kenya, we have moved this far on this target, number 1. We have moved this far on this target, number 7. We are not doing very well on this other target, and the reasons we are not doing well are this. Mr. Speaker, anywhere any planning anywhere on earth, even in corporate planning, if you don't set marks, if you don't set targets, if you don't measure performance, then there is nothing you do. You are just moving around the circles. And Parliament, I'm afraid, has been moving around the circles. And I doubt that any of us can confidently be able to say that on SDG 7, Kenya is here and is not doing very well, or Kenya is doing very well, or the county of Meru is doing well, but the county of Kakamega is not doing well. We need to get to that level where we are able, as Parliament, to say that we are moving well on SDGs. Mr. Speaker, Article 2 of the Constitution makes ratified international treaties and obligations as part of the laws of Kenya. We are the House that stands to make those laws and to monitor and oversight the implementation of those laws. So this motion is seeking to get national government and county government to move deliberately in a manner that will enable us to be able to see that the CIDP of Busia County has properly factored in and is able to give us information around the 16th. Mr. Speaker, I move to support, and I request that Senator Beatrice Oyomo seconds this motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Beatrice.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to second the motion brought by Senator Catherine Moma over the Sustainable Development Goals. And Mr. Speaker, sir, the Sustainable Development Goals were ratification by the UN member states, as the mover says, in 2016. And Mr. Speaker, sir, they form a world, they form what other countries, the member countries, use to prepare their national development plans. And because of the constitutional composition of this country, where we have one national government and 47 county governments, Mr. Speaker, sir, it means the SDGs are cascaded down right from the development plans of this country to the 47 counties that we have in this republic. Mr. Speaker, sir, the SDGs were premised on delivery of 2030. And Mr. Speaker, sir, it is important to note that we only have 7 years remaining to the end of 2030. Mr. Speaker, sir, as the mover indicates, the SDG are, she mentioned that there are 16, but Mr. Speaker, sir, there are 17 goals of the SDGs, and as she spells out, SDG 1 is no poverty, SDG 2 is zero hunger. SDG 3 is good health. 4 is quality education. 5 is gender equality. 6 is clean water and sanitation. 7 is affordable and clean energy. 8 is decent work and economic growth. 9 is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. 10 talks about reduced inequalities. 11 is sustainable cities and communities. 12 is a responsible consumption and production. The 13th is on climate action. SDG 14 is on life below water. 15 is life on land. 16 is peace, justice, strong institutions. And lastly, the 17th SDG is on the partnership for all the goals. Honorable Speaker, the main rallying point of the Sustainable Development Goals is about leave no one behind. And Honorable Speaker, I'm happy also to mention that the last conference on the UN SDGs was in New York from the 9th to 19th of this month. Nobody was left behind in the participation from this country. We had a multi-sectorial team composed of the legislators, the county governments, and the representatives of the national government. That really was impressive at the conference, and all was to emphasize on what is the participation, what is the implementation program that each county has. Honorable Speaker, we as a Senate are so keen on the SDGs because a number of it talks to the mandates that the Senate has. The county governments draw their functions, some of them from the SDGs. And Honorable Speaker, the report that this country presented at the conference was impressive. But Honorable Speaker, we are still not as a country or as member states not performing up to expectation. It is upon this that I want to second the motion by Honorable Senator Catherine Moma that as a Senate, as Parliament, we need to get reports on the status of the implementation of the SDGs from the national government and from this county government, so that as a country we know what is our status in the years that we've had. And Honorable Speaker, ensure that the remaining 7 years we are able to upscale our performance and meet the goals of the SDGs as spelled out. Honorable Speaker, I second this motion.
Very well. Honorable Senators, I propose the question. Aware that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted by all United Nations member states in 20
20
2015 provides a shared global blueprint aimed at ending poverty, protecting the Earth's environment and climate, and ensuring that people everywhere enjoy peace and prosperity. Appreciating that the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Kenya, started by the official launch of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, in Kenya in 2016, followed by the involvement of the country SDGs roadmap to guide the transition from Millennium Development Goals to SDGs, and the mainstreaming of the SDGs at both national and the county governments. Concerned that the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Kenya has been affected negatively by shocks such as continued drought since 2019 in Kenya and around the world, serious invasion by desert locusts, the COVID-19 pandemic, and other public health calamities, and the current strained state of the Kenyan economy. Now, therefore, the Senate resolves that the State Department for Economic Planning, in consultation with the Council of Governors, comes up with the reviewed implementation roadmaps for the two levels of government, taking into account the shocks that have impeded or any other that are likely to impede the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I can see a few senators are lined up for contributions. Senator Okech, Eddie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it is lovely to see you after a while. I want to...
Thank you. Also, Paul Esan, I can see you have something happened to you. I wish you quick recovery, Senator Eddie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm getting better, and I'm happy to be able to once in a while pop in the house and contribute. And it's amazing that this morning we are discussing the SDG goals because these Sustainable Development Goals are a key framework to ensure that the human index in our countries can be able to improve, with the ultimate scale being able to have a happy nation. And that happiness is definitely signified by the element of dignity. Mr. Speaker, a few elements of development in the past have been development that are not keen to ensuring human dignity, to the extent that things like structural adjustment programs that we read about, and some of senators of this house actually did witness in the 90s and in the 80s, did not put a framework that can be able to ensure that development has got an inclusive growth in nature, and more awesomely able to look at the root causes of problems that nations, especially in the sub-Saharan African countries, and of course they also used to say Asian countries used to face. But in the context of Kenya, when SDGs were constituted together by the United Nations, Mr. Speaker, I think this was the first attempt that we saw a close focus to the real problems that we were facing. As the second of the motion, Senator Beatrice has actually highlighted some of the SDGs that we're talking about, one being no poverty, second being zero hunger and good health, among others, together with education. These, in the context of Kenya, Mr. Speaker, have become become goals that, for us, they have become issues of basic needs. If you remember, Mr. Speaker, there used to be a time that basic needs used to be classified as simply housing, food, and clothing. But for our country, we have moved, deliberately so, to be able to include things like health and education as fundamental to our conversation in this country. But of course, the motion today, Mr. Speaker, is to the extent of trying to assess what have we achieved with regards to the implementation of these Sustainable Development Goals. I wanted to invite your attention, Mr. Speaker, to the idea that even though we wanted to advance the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals, Mr. Speaker, we should not forget that we had Millennium Development Goals. And these Millennium Development Goals, Mr. Speaker, were not as much attained and the worst thing is that when the time that was put in place for the Millennium Development Goals elapsed, there was no proper evaluation on the implementation and achievement that did. So the first thing I wanted to say, Mr. Speaker, is that this motion is very, very good for us as a nation, notwithstanding other countries doing their own things, because, Mr. Speaker, we don't want to get to 2030 and then start being in a situation whereby we are saying that this was a time-bound ideology in terms of development goals, and therefore, because the timeline has elapsed, therefore we need to move forward to the next goals. That then we will be entering a country that is simply, engaging on rhetoric narratives that other people are engaging in. So, for us as a country, we need to look at what are the specific issues that constitute the challenges and opportunities that makes it either impossible to achieve some of these development goals or are just impediments that can be dealt with. And for me, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to say very quickly that this will be four for me when I cast my eyes upon Kenyan development agenda and economic planning. The first one, Mr. Speaker, that as this bill probably will go all the way and become an act that will be considered by the relevant ministry, the first thing I would want to see very well addressed by the relevant ministry is the issue of privatization framework on these goals with regards to our country. Mr. Speaker, most countries that I've seen try to achieve these goals have been very good at articulating the suitability and availability of resources with regards to these goals. As a country, we have not had articulation by the ministry of, that has got relevance instruments of economic planning, articulating our suitability in terms of our resources, both human and hard resources, with regard to some of these goals.